Christmas is fast approaching, so today we share something a little more light-hearted. From St. Nicholas to the modern-day Santa Claus, various versions of the joy-sharing, present-giving, legendary figure have been in existence since at least the 11th century, perhaps even earlier. We all think we know that modern-day Santa Claus is that of legend. However, some claim to have actually seen him, met with him and spoken to him. And no, we aren't talking about the Santa at the mall. These incredible claims are not isolated to one story. There are many. If these claims are true, how has it become possible to physically interact with legend itself? Today, perhaps with tongue-in-cheek, we share several true accounts where everyday folk really do believe that they have met Santa Claus. Welcome to Mysteries Retold.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Remarkably, a simple search online, coupled with discussion, quickly reveals many stories where people believe they met or saw Santa Claus. Interestingly, most stories carry huge similarities. The majority come from adults recounting events from their childhood, occurring late at night on the eve of Christmas, with overexcited children who, after their encounter, soon fall asleep. We are not here to discount the stories. We believe something happened to the storyteller. What exactly that is, we will leave you to ponder and debate. Our first story comes from a man named Mark. It was Christmas Eve of 1985, and Mark was about 6 years old. Like so many children around Christmas, Mark was completely overexcited. Additionally, he was generally a hyperactive child. After going to bed on Christmas Eve, Mark lay there wide awake, eagerly awaiting the morning, which couldn't come quickly enough. In his bed, Mark listened out for any movement from his parents, any rustling of wrapping paper, or evidence of his presence being moved from the parents' room to the living room. By this point, Mark was well aware, or so he thought, that Santa didn't exist. So his sole focus was listening to what his parents were doing. It was about 2 a.m. when he finally heard what he was hoping to hear: the rustling of wrapping paper, shuffling of footsteps, and moving of boxes. This was the moment Mark had been waiting for. He quietly got out of bed and sneaked out of his room. He headed toward the living room door and pushed it open a crack. There in front of him, he saw something he didn't expect. Not his mother, nor his father, but a stranger. He was wearing a red jacket with red trousers, a thick black belt, and snowy, muddy black boots with thick soles. White hair was poking out from under a red hat he was wearing, and there was an empty bag on the floor beside him. It was Santa, all right. In his hands he held a box wrapped in glossy green paper. At first, Mark was absolutely terrified. He didn't believe in Santa, and was old enough to think they were probably being robbed. Still, at the crack of the door, Mark took a sharp breath. The man in red immediately turned and saw Mark. The stranger held a finger up toward his mouth, over his white beard, giving him the signal to be quiet. He called Mark by name and told him to enter the living room. He said, "You're not supposed to be awake, Mark, and you're definitely not supposed to see me." Mark was shaking and said, "Are you Santa?" The man chuckled, a wholesome, deep chuckle. "Yeah, kid, some people do call me that, don't be scared." With that notion, Santa was gone, immediately and without a trace. Mark went back to his room, and this time he did fall asleep. Now an adult to this day, Mark has no doubt he not only saw Santa but spoke with him. A similar tale is shared by a man called Craig, who was also around 6 years old at the time, and had become seriously overexcited on Christmas Eve, lying in bed awaiting morning to dawn. Craig was listening out for signs of movement in the house and any evidence that Santa had arrived. Fighting sleep, it was around 1 a.m. when Craig heard what he had been waiting for. He detected faint sounds of bells jingling before footsteps slowly moving across the wooden floorboards downstairs. Someone was clearly doing something in the living room near the Christmas tree. Craig got out of bed and started creeping towards the stairs, slowly as not to alert his parents and, in his mind, to not alert Santa either. As Craig approached the stairs, he suddenly slipped and stumbled forward. Now falling straight towards the stairs, he put his hands out. He had lost control of his motion and was about to go tumbling down the stairs. As he fell, he suddenly felt a strong hand grab his shoulders and pull him back, rescuing his fall and placing him in a sitting position on the edge of the top stair. Looking up, Craig was speechless. There, standing above him at well over 6 feet, was a large man. Again, this man was dressed in red, had a large black belt, white beard, rosy cheeks, a red hat, and large chunky black boots. It was Santa, all right, no doubts in Craig's mind. As Craig opened his mouth to try and find some words to say, Santa smiled and simply said, "You're not supposed to be up at this time, go back to sleep. You'll be okay, I promise." The next thing Craig remembers is his father waking him up. Craig was still sat on the top step, but had felt like he had instantly fallen asleep. His dad had heard Craig slip and ran out to check what was going on. He was surprised himself to see Craig asleep and having not fallen over. To this day, Craig stands by the events that happened that night and feels as if he saw Santa. We may argue that perhaps this story was down to sleepwalking, a dream maybe in the mind of an overexcited child. What makes this one strange, however, is the fact the father heard him stumbling by the stairs about to fall, but running out to investigate, he found Craig sitting perfectly still and fast asleep on the top stair. Our next story comes from Australia, where a woman called Sally and her sister state that they saw Santa flying on his sleigh being led by several reindeer. Sally was 10 years old at that point. In Australia, the summer is over the Christmas period, and her family had gone away as a larger group, staying in log cabins at a resort. Generally, they would spend a large portion of time outside playing while the adults cooked on the barbecues, and the families hung out together. This night, Christmas Eve, was no different. They had stayed outside until about 10 p.m. before everyone went off to bed. Sally and her sister were sharing a room, and at midnight they were still awake, chatting, predictably too excited to sleep. This was the late 90s, and Sally had a Game Boy, which her sister suggested they play to pass the time. Sally realized she had left it outside. Pushed by her sister to go and get it, Sally explained she was too scared to go alone. Sally's sister teased her but gave in and said, "Fair enough." They both went back out to the fire pit together to grab the Game Boy, which was in the pile of stuff they'd left outside. They crept out of their room so as not to wake anyone, and quietly opened the door to the log cabin. Walking over to the fireplace, they both suddenly felt a presence. Sally describes the feeling as nothing she has experienced before or since. It was like magic. Sally says she doesn't know what made them do it, but her and her sister suddenly both looked up toward the moon. What the pair of them saw left them stunned. Just like a scene from a movie, they saw Santa's sleigh fly through the light of the moon being led by reindeer. They were certain it wasn't a bird, a plane, a shooting star, or anything else they were familiar with. It was a sleigh. Flying and trailing behind it was what almost looked like sparkly dust. Then as quickly as they saw it, it was gone. The sisters grabbed the Game Boy and ran inside, shocked but alive with the excitement of what they had both seen together. To this day, the sisters stand by their encounter. Both claim certainty on what they saw. Santa on his sleigh, flying through the Christmas Eve night. A far shorter story, but all too familiar, a Reddit user named Lynn also describes being around 5 or 6 years old and waking up at home to the sound of footsteps in the living room, which was directly opposite her bedroom. She opened her door a crack and saw Santa by the Christmas tree. Trying to get a better view through the crack of the door, she opened it slightly more, but that caused the door to squeak, and Santa immediately turned toward her. Lynn then saw a puff of gold dust illuminate the air, and the man was gone. Suddenly, just gone. The next thing Lynn knew was that she was waking up in her bed, and it was Christmas morning. She doesn't remember going back to sleep, but was certain it wasn't a dream. She claims she remembers being awake and seeing Santa. Our final story yet again follows a similar pattern. This one, shared by someone called Jill, happened in Texas when she was 8 years old. Again, Jill was a very hyperactive child and far too excited to sleep deeply on the night of Christmas Eve. Throughout the night of Christmas Eve, Jill would consistently get up to see if her presents were there. First at 11, then 12, then 1, and so on. This year she carried on that pattern until 3 a.m. During the 3 a.m. inspection, she saw something she didn't expect. Quietly tiptoeing into the living room, she looked right towards the tree and saw a bundle of presents there. Ecstatic, she started to creep towards the tree, but then, to her right-hand side, heard something fall to the floor. Quickly scanning the room to her right, she saw an imposing man near the fireplace. Dressed in red, with the usual white beard, big black belt, black boots and hat. It was Santa. On the carpet near Santa, she saw the small silver cup they had left out filled with Christmas wine on the floor, the wine spilling on the carpet. Santa had knocked it over. Jill was 8 years old. She knew Santa wasn't real, but again had no doubt in what she was seeing. Jill stood speechless and stumbled backward. She then says Santa looked straight at her and smiled. Santa said, "You should be in bed." Santa then turned and, to Jill's utter amazement, ventured straight up the chimney. She even recalls his boots dangling down and Santa kicking one last time as he slipped up the chimney. Consistent with other stories, Jill then remembers waking up in the morning. She doesn't remember going back to bed, but vividly remembers the incident with Santa Claus as clear as any memory. It was as if she was sent back to sleep, like she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. The next morning, she got up with her parents and they went to open the presents in the living room, her parents keeping up their tradition of entering first to check if Santa had been. They called Jill in, saying he had been all right. Of course, Jill already knew this. Jill entered the room, the presents under the tree on the left-hand side of the room, but to her amazement, on the right-hand side of the room, on the floor, lay the little silver cup, wine spilled on the carpet. Her parents put this down to their mischievous cat having knocked it over. However, Jill knows what she saw that night, and to this day claims the real reason it was on the floor was Santa, leaving in a hurry. So where do we go with these stories? They all have striking similarities. Firstly, seeing a modern-day Santa Claus dressed in red. By that very definition, we know this is a modern manufactured version of the legend of St. Christopher, who was often depicted wearing green. Why would the children all see something manufactured? Secondly, the stories come from adults with vivid childhood memories, the children often extremely excited on Christmas Eve, but also extremely tired. Thirdly, it seems very common that those who share the stories don't necessarily remember going back to sleep, drifting back into a slumber, as if it never happened. We all know Santa's not real, don't we? Could it be that they were dreaming, vividly imagining exactly what they wanted to see, which in itself raises interesting points. If the imagination of a child is so powerful that they are able to conjure their dreams, don't we all have this power? Perhaps we should all stop worrying about the future and start dreaming of the lives we want to live. Thank you for watching Mysteries Retold. All involved in the channel wish you a very happy Christmas. Enjoy yourselves and have a fantastic holiday period. If you have enjoyed the content, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, folks, perhaps stay off that naughty list, just in case. Good night.